All right, all. And with that, we're off. So first of all, good evening to everybody. As we kind of get settled in here, if you've joined us before, and I know we have a handful of familiar faces and regulars, if you're looking for Silas Morgan, he is here. He's not hosting. We have a new host tonight. So Gerard Mechka is your host. So you all know me. And for those that don't know me, I'm Gerard Mechka. I work private client wine sales for the Chicago Wine Company. Silas is with us tonight, as is Mike Taylor, who handles the Quintessa family of wines for the Midwest. And of course, our featured guest tonight, Miss Rebekah Wineburg. Thank you both for joining us. Really appreciate it. We value your time. So, like I said, as usual, we have a handful of familiar faces. But for those who don't know me, and like I said, I introduced myself before, Gerard Mechka. So my background is in restaurants and hospitality, and so these are wine. These the Quintessa wines, these Quintessa, the Quintessa especially, is something that's I've got a soft spot for. It's something that I've been fortunate to taste multiple vintages of over the years, and it's one of my very favorites in all of Napa. I think the wines have certainly never been better recently in the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm excited to lead this tasting tonight and to share it with everybody. And like I said, I'm joined by my colleague Silas Morgan, who has a similar role at Chicago Wine Company. And while I'm going to let Mike and Rebekah go into much further detail about the property, obviously, and what makes it special, the idea of partnering with Quintessa was super appealing to us, because not just because of the longevity of the property. I mean, even though it's not necessarily Heights and Mondavi old in that sense, it's still one of the classic Napa properties that dates back to the early 1990s, and they've stayed true to their classic roots. And there's so many unique qualities of the property, again, that I'll let Rebekah and Mike speak to. But it's one of those estates that can compete qualitatively with Bordeaux. It's so unique, and there's techniques and blending principles that make the flagship wine every bit. Like I said, just first-rate quality. And this is exciting to not only be able to taste 3 different vintages of Quintessa, but 3 terrific vintages of Quintessa, along with one of the most unique Sauvignon Blancs in California. So this is super exciting. So with that, I will turn it over to Mike and Rebekah. Nobody wants to hear me speak on this too long, but before I turn it over, I do want to let everybody know and remind those we want this to be interactive and casual and fun. So if you could use the chat feature throughout the event, we'll do our best. Silas and I will do our best to incorporate questions for Rebekah throughout the evening. And then we'll do our best to make some time for a little Q&A session towards the end. Myself, I have some hard-hitting questions right away. I want to know. Mike, you're welcome to join here. But for Rebekah, while I pass it over to the two of you, so hard-hitting questions. I suppose we can get into wine stuff later, but so with Labor Day approaching and knowing that in the Midwest, this is kind of like the last hurrah for summer. So can't speak to Napa. I know it's going to be beautiful for a little while. But last chance to cook out, last hurrah for summer. What is the proper condiment or proper topping for a hot dog or hamburger? You will be judged by that. And then, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
As I'll take that, and I'll ask one more question. I'll say, I believe you, if I'm not mistaken, you grew up on the East Coast. So
I did.
East Coast pizza. Deep dish pizza. Is there some hidden gems in Napa and Sonoma? You shook your head at deep dish pizza.
I'm sorry. Wow. I'm so sorry.
We all saw that.
I'm going to answer the hot dog question correctly, but I'm sorry about the pizza.
Take it. Go. Go for it.
Okay. Really, what's the hot dog topping is for me, sauerkraut and relish. I don't know if that's the correct answer.
No, that's a fantastic answer.
But well, I do believe that pizza needs to be foldable, by the slice and foldable. Otherwise, it's a pizza, it's a pie, it's a bread pie. But sorry, do you guys want to end the Zoom now?
You can submit all your comments and opinions on that to Silas and I. We'll pass them along to Rebekah tomorrow.
Yeah, now I'm not going to share my email or phone now.
She can be found at the winery. These are her hours at the winery.
Yeah, usually I am harvesting during Labor Day, and this year I will not be. So I'm going to take advantage and, of course, continue to walk vineyards and such, but get a little bit more sleep before it gets really crazy for us here.
Good for you.
So hey guys, I'll drive the presentation from my end so I can kind of let Rebekah talk. So bear with me 1 minute while I
And I hope
find
everyone
this,
is starting to taste already. I actually got ahead of myself and I finished my illumination glass, which is good. Then I won't need to get interrupted while I speak. But it's I know that some of you guys have visited us. I recognize some faces and thank you for reminding me. We did a very extensive tasting with the Commandery de Bordeaux about, gosh, it would have been like 3 years ago. And we were tasting some of the barrel components to talk about the effect of our terroir and really to dive deep into what makes Napa, what makes Quintessa. And I have these slides that Michael created that I think are really helpful to share the story of Quintessa and illumination. All of the wines that we make here are wines of expression of terroir, I call them. As Gerard mentioned, this is a classic estate. Quintessa was founded in 1989 on a piece of land in Rutherford that had never been farmed before. I think, Michael, can you go to the next, do you have the next shot as Valeria and Augustine? No. Yes, perfect. All right. Yep. And our history goes back even farther than that. So Augustine and Valeria Huneeus are the founders of Quintessa and the owners and founders of Huneeus Vintners overall, which is a family of wineries, family of estate wineries that include Quintessa. We are the I guess iconic estate in the group. We are the home of Augustine and Valeria. They actually have their home on the estate and the beginning of Huneeus Vintners, but we also are included with Flowers Winery, Faust Winery, Leviathan, and Benton Lane. So it's a really, fun group of wineries that all are working towards expressing a distinctive character and estate vineyards in our piece of land. And Quintessa is the beginning of all of that. Augustine and Valeria Huneeus, who in this picture, they're looking as they are beginning to plant Quintessa, have spent over 6 decades in the wine world. Augustine actually began working in wine in the 1960s in their native Chile. They are both Chilean, and rescued what was then a failing wine company, which is Conciliatoro. So Augustine has its incredible history in the wine business that at the time that they were finding Quintessa, they had already built up a very firm and detailed belief about what makes a great wine estate. And Valeria, his wife in this picture, Valeria is a viticulturalist. So that is someone who has studied and manages vineyards. So studied the science of grape growing and manages vineyards. And Augustine and Valeria were looking for a project that would be the culmination of this lifetime working in wine, a project that they could work on together as a family, and something that would be able to utilize everything that they had learned, everything they believe about what makes a great wine. And one day while they were doing this search, Valeria found this property that was mostly abandoned. It's in the heart of Rutherford. It was called the Mardikian Ranch. And this was a series of rolling hills that had grassland on them, some oak woodlands. There were about 3 donkeys and some cattle on the property and a ranch home and nothing else. It was had used to be the vacation home of a San Francisco restaurateur named George Mardikian. And he bought the property in the 1940s. And Napa was very different in the 1940s. This was a place that you came to get away and to have parties and, just have a very good time. And nothing had ever been developed on this property. Valeria walked onto this estate and she immediately felt something. She felt that this is a place that has a voice, that has a soul, and that it would be her role to fulfill that and to express that. And so in 1990, Augustine and Valeria were able, or 1989, Augustine and Valeria were able to acquire this property. and create Quintessa. And from the very beginning, Quintessa was founded with the idea that this place had the potential to be a great wine estate of the world, that it would have beautiful terroir, and that would make one wine from one estate. And so the wine that we make from the estate is named Quintessa, the same name as the estate. And that's really important because the wine expresses the soul of the property. Michael, can you go to your next slide? Do you have the overview of the vineyard? Oh, beautiful. All right. Okay, stop here. Actually, I like this. Oh, you made a good sign.
Is this the one you were looking for?
That is the one I'm looking for. Yes,
Yeah,
perfect.
I thought so.
So this is my favorite. And this is, if that last picture was Augustin and Valeria planting Quintessa in 1989, here is where we are today, 30 years later, with a wine that is known and shared around the world and has a, in the grand scheme of things, we're still young. This is a short history. 30 years is not all that long. It's a bit of a drop in the bucket, but we're really excited about where we are right now because we've come to that first stage of maturity. The original vines are 30 years old. We've had 30 years of farming this place, of understanding the terroir, and we're embarking on a new phase of understanding. So we get to taste our older vintages, which teach us how Quintessa ages, kind of proves the belief in the ageability, the belief in the character of the wine. And then we are looking towards the future. And I think that's what the 2018 vintage represents, looking towards the future, and are very excited about what this means. This is Quintessa Estate. It is pretty unique in Napa Valley. So like I mentioned, we're in Rutherford, which is the historic heart of Napa Valley, very well known for growing Bordeaux varieties. And as Napa Valley was being developed and our AVAs were being developed, I think that they first were defined by climate. When you're young and you're beginning and understanding yourself as a region, you just define yourself by your climate. And as you go north up Napa Valley, it gets warmer. So you get the cooling effect of the San Pablo Bay, and that's Carneros up warmer. Carneros up to Calistoga. And as you get farther away from the San Pablo Bay, you get a bit warmer. There's another very important part of the climate in Napa Valley, and that's our fog layer. We actually get fog that comes up from the south and a fog that comes from the north that meets in the middle. Every night it's very cold, like actually really quite cold at night and pretty hot during the day. And this diurnal shift allows us to maintain this freshness of acidity. The way that the fog burns off defines what kind of varieties you can ripen. So being in the center of Napa Valley, Rutherford is always considered great for Bordeaux varieties, for Cabernet, the varieties that have stronger tannin. But as we've come to understand the place more, and Quintessa is the perfect place to understand Napa even better, we've come to understand that there's even more going on. Napa is very diverse in its geologic setting. So Napa is a valley, and here you see with Quintessa, we're nestled up alongside a mountain range. That mountain range that you see on the right-hand side, that's the Vaca mountain range, which is the eastern mountain range of Napa Valley. On the left-hand side, in the kind of the distance, you see another mountain range. That's the Mayacamas mountain range. So these two mountain ranges were formed very rapidly and very dramatically by the subduction or the conjunction of two tectonic plates that's happening off the west coast of the United States, and also what we call the triple junction, so the unzippering of this fault. So we have both two tectonic plates, one's going underneath the other, and you cause a little bit of rippling that's causing the mountain ranges of California. But adding to this, there is a fault line that is unzippering and conjoining with those two tectonic plates. And where that's occurring is what is called, geologists call, a triple junction. Geology is the base for all terroir. So you start with geology, then you have soils, then you have climate, then you have culture. least that's what I believe. And Napa Valley is really interesting because it was formed very dramatically, very rapidly as that triple junction was moving north. Right now, the triple junction's outside of Washington State. When the triple junction is moving, you have a period of volcanic activity. So the Mayacamas and the Vaca Mountain Range are volcanic, or were volcanic. They're not active anymore. So they were formed by volcanic activity. And so depending where you are in the Napa Valley, you are defined by the volcanic origins of your rocks, of your geology. And then you have the effect, the alluvial effect, the effect of the Napa River that's running right through Napa Valley. And you can see in this map, we're looking north, that Quintessa comes up onto the Vaca Mountain Range. So that's one of the three geologic factors in Napa Valley. And sorry, you can't see my cursor, but you see there's a tree line down the center. That is the Napa River. So that is actually the western border of Quintessa. We go all the way from the Vaca Mountain Range to the Napa River. And we are touching then two of the three main geologic factors of Napa Valley. The other distinct, and I'll stop talking about geology after this, unless you guys want to have more questions about it. The other really cool thing about Quintessa that you can see in this picture is that it has hillsides. So we're on the valley floor. We are west of the Silverado Trail. We hit the Napa River, yet we have hillsides on the property. And that is quite an interesting mystery about why that occurs. So we have begun working with not just soil studies, a terroir expert, Pedro Parra, but also now a geologist to understand the story of why we have these hills on the property, and then how it informs the character of the wine, because it informs it directly. It's not just about elevation or aspect, it's about the origin of these soils, the origin of the rocks that then break down to create the soil that the vines are living in, that affect the flavor of the wine. So it turns out that, as I was saying, this like kind of very massive and exciting period of time geologically, when the Vaca and the Mayacamas mountain ranges were forming, it was happening so fast. So the Vaca mountain range in particular was pushing up so fast that at one point it couldn't handle its own weight and angle. And there was massive landslide off of the Vaca mountain range. That's what caused the eastern hills of Quintessa. So those rolling hills that you see on the eastern side of Quintessa. And that's what explains why those soils in that part of the Quintessa estate is contained of all white volcanic ash, white rocks that we locally call tuff. They're similar to tufa, which is found in parts of southern Italy, but they're not calcareous. They're different. So this is not a limestone soil. This is a tuff. So it's a white volcanic ash. And it's also found on Pritchard Hill and Howell Mountain. So that explains why this terroir from Pritchard Hill and Howell Mountain ended up on the valley floor in the eastern side of Quintessa. It also tells the story and explains why we have the other two hillside ranges of Quintessa. And locally, those are what we know as toe hills. There's a few as you go down the Napa Valley toe hills. There's the Quintessa toe hills. And then there is a hillside in Oakville, right at Rudd. So it goes Rudd, Screaming Eagle, and the Bond Mount Eden Vineyard, or St. Eden Vineyard. Those are at the toe hill. There's a big toe hill in Rutherford, in Oakville, that has the same kind of story of why it occurred. And then there's also one at Stag's Leap. But other than that, the valley floor is pretty flat and uniform. So how do these toe hills form? And it turns out that that landslide is so big that the ground beneath it, the earth on the other side of it, has to go somewhere, and it actually pushes it up. So as the landslide falls down, it's so it's so energetic that it causes the earth behind it to move like water and to ripple up. And those ripples are what we call the toe hills. Those ripples are the central hills and the western hills of Quintessa. And as that somewhat mostly explains the terroir that we have there. And we have this mix of volcanics and cobbles and gravels. And on the central hill, so on the eastern side of the Dragon's Lake, that lake in the center, you have this brown soil that has the suppleness in the wine. On the western side, so that's our main hillside that we can see in the middle of this picture, there's red soils. And when you're tasting that Quintessa, do you see this minerality, this tar character, the graphite? Well, that's from that part of the property. And then finally, of course, you have the true Rutherford dust, the true alluvial fan that you see by the Napa River. So that's this really interesting geologic story of Napa Valley, or of Quintessa, but it also is fun because Quintessa is this microcosm of the story of Napa Valley and how it was formed. And we see all of this diversity. And that is what is so special about the geology, the terroir of Quintessa, is the power of its individual parts, but the diversity of it as well. So every year we're able to make a wine that has layers of flavor and character, that within a single estate, it has multiple facets. It's a mosaic of different entities and different character. And then that shows through in an incredible wine every year that is a harmonious blend and shows the character of the entire estate. So that's what, I don't know if you can tell if I get so excited about this. That's what really makes Quintessa Quintessa. And as you get to taste the different vintages that you're tasting, and I hope you notice these, a stream through them all that has this essence of Quintessa. I'd say that there is the essence of Quintessa is this length to the finish, this incredible texture that's almost like a fine chalkiness. That's the Eastern Hills. And then you have the density and the structure in the center. That is the Central Hills and that volcanic grittiness. Volcanic soils have a lot of great acidity. And then the plushness and the flesh, especially when the wines are younger, that you get from the benchlands. That's the entirety of the Quintessa estate, but as it expresses itself over different years. Did I jump ahead, Michael? I'm sorry. Like I said, I already finished the illumination that I poured myself.
Well, in terms of how we're going to taste the wine, we'll start with illumination. Then we'll work our way into the Quintessa, but we'll, why don't we do that? Why don't we talk a little bit about the illumination? We'll get into that, and then we'll kind of get, as we're sort of talking through the different vintages, I've got some other maps and some other things in here. We can kind of look further into the property. But this starting off, and probably most people have this in the glass right now. Most people don't realize that this is sort of the white counterpart to Quintessa, and just how much dedication you personally put into this wine, and why it's so fun.
Well, I love illumination. You're right. Illumination is the partner to Quintessa. It's our white wine, and it is a blend of Sauvignon Blanc, Sauvignon Muscat, and Semillon. And like illumination, or like Quintessa, illumination is a blend. It's a blend of those different varieties. It is a blend of different fermentation vessels, and it's a wine that is going to have those layers of flavor built in. I recently had the opportunity to taste a couple older vintages of illumination too. And Sauvignon Blanc is a really incredible variety, and it is eminently ageable as well. As the wine ages, it brings on some of its weight, some of more depth of flavor, and kind of loses this purity of the citrus aromas, and builds in the beeswax honey and the fleshiness that I love so much. Illumination is also a blend of a couple of different vineyards as well. So we're here in Napa Valley, and the core of illumination is at the Rutherford Estate, is at our Quintessa Estate in a cooler area. So we're looking to get a Sauvignon Muscat that has, oops, you went too fast.
Well, I wanted to kind of show this map, and so
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you can see my cursor, but if I'm correct, the Sauvignon Blanc's coming from down in this Benchland area, correct?
So there is some in the Benchland, and then also up by the house.
Oh,
So also up by
just
the north of Dragon's Lake.
on the side.
I think your cursor's a little too high. So if you look at the lake, it's also on the tip of the lake. So that's in a lower elevation. They're both in lower elevation sites that
Okay.
have are cooler and have a little bit more clay to them as well. So illumination's capturing the character of our California sunshine. You have peach aromatics, but because they're in cooler areas, we're retaining all of that bright acidity and citrus notes. Then there is the blend. So the Sauvignon Blanc is what you expect from Sauvignon Blanc, right? Great acidity, brightness, mouth-watering character. You get grapefruit, pithiness, minerality, very citrus, a little grassy. Sauvignon Blanc Muscat, which is about half of the Sauvignon Blanc component in illumination, is a variation on Sauvignon Blanc. So we used to think it was a different variety, but through DNA testing, now we've proved it's actually Sauvignon Blanc, and it's considered a clone or a selection, but it is more perfumed. So it has more floral components in the wine, more peach character, so a little bit more tropical, and a little bit of this, and it's going to sound funny, like umami, like a savory umami herbal character. Beautiful. And then of course there's Semillon. So this is like similar, different of course, but similar to a white Bordeaux blend. The Semillon contributes weight and texture, and I also think has a lot to do with the ageability of illumination. Then you have the different varieties, and then to add on to this, as Michael says, I put a lot of attention into illumination. I'm utilizing different fermentation vessels to accentuate the character of the grapes. Little bit of new French oak barrels, that's spice and a little bit of tannin and weight. Neutral French oak barrels allow the true fruit character to shine through. I use French acacia wood, which might be new to you guys. French acacia wood is a slow growing tree that has very tight grain, doesn't have tannin like oak, but does have a aromatic quality. So it brings in this floral character, a little bit like dried floral, or if anyone ever played with modeling wood, like balsam wood. And it has this edginess to it, which I think is really great for Sauvignon Blanc, a little bit more sharpness to the elbows of the wine. Stainless steel lets you maintain the purity of the fruit and really that linear acidity. What I love about illumination is its mouth-watering capabilities. And then concrete eggs. And concrete eggs they look like Humpty Dumpty. There's one in this picture. They are unlined concrete eggs, and they allow the minerality to show through. This is a beautiful, about 20% component of illumination. I think someone just asked me if the new French oak meant new barrels or old barrels. That's actually about 4% new French oak, and then the about 60% neutral, so used barrels. So the new French oak does give a little bit of an oak character, but it's working in the blend. So with all of the differences in the varieties and the fermentation vessels, when it comes to making illumination, I can have 70, some years actually I had 85, lots to work with to create this blend. Blending is the magic of winemaking. There's a lot of science in a lot of what we do. I think there's science, there's intuition. Blending is like magic, because 2 + 2 doesn't always equal 4 when you're working with a blend. And as we are working on illumination and having so many different components to work with, it allows us to make that wine that has the depth of character, the mouth-watering notes, the citrus, the true expression of our Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon terroir, and then the ageability, the body, and the compelling texture. For me, that's what's so special about illumination, is the fact that it is a wine that I can have in place of a cocktail. It's a wine that I drink just as a glass. It's a wine that I think is perfect on the table because it has this incredible roundness and textural component. It's creamy without being creamy. This is no malolactic fermentation, really bright acidity, cleans your mouth, makes your mouth water. It makes it perfect for so many different foods. And then it's also ageable. And it doesn't seem to have, from my experience, it doesn't seem to have a dumb stage as well when you're aging it. And so I've been drinking a lot of the 2018 illumination right now. I actually need to buy another case because I'm almost out at home. And I do have some 19 and some 20 and some 17. And when Michael was, we had a group, the whole team came to visit earlier in the summer, I actually pulled out a 2006 illumination to share. And that was an incredible week with incredible wines, but I think that was actually one of the wines of the whole trip.
It was delicious.
It was delicious. The freshness, it's like a dessert wine without being sweet. If you want to, like, it's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, just to give you guys an idea of the complexity of this wine, for average Sauvignon Blanc, you see a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc on the shelf. Generally speaking, these are wines, the fruit is picked, it is pressed, it's fermented, it goes into tank for a couple, several weeks usually, and then into bottle and off to the stores. So not to say that's a bad thing. I mean, they're just very they're much more simple styles of wines, right? With this having all these different lots and all these different vessels and things, this is really a very complex wine, and I think in that manner shows so well next to the red. I think you do an incredible job with this wine.
Oh, thank you. And you know what I like to do too, but of course I didn't leave anything in my glass. When I'm tasting a lot of wines and tasting a lot of red wines, and I put illumination either in, if I have a large tasting, I'll put illumination in the middle. I like to have illumination at the end of a tasting and also at the end of the meal. It's fresh and it's bright and it's cleansing. And so if you guys are able to keep a little bit in your glass, I highly recommend that you keep it. And then as you're tasting through the Quintessa, you revisit the illumination at the end as well. Oh, these are beautiful pictures. So here is Quintessa. So, you're talking about up too late. See, thank you, people. It makes me feel good. That was like me. I think I finished mine before we even started. And then I was like, oh, and the wine's like is now far away. I'll get a little more for dinner. So we are talking about Quintessa, and we talked about the idea of an estate. What does it mean to be an estate? And I think that what being an estate means is that you are sourcing all your wines from one contiguous property. And this is a property that you are farming yourself with your own team. So you have a team of people who are dedicated to the site. You are making the wine on the site with a custom designed winery. So this picture's right here. This is the Quintessa Winery that was built to match the character of the Quintessa Estate. And also with that same kind of philosophy of respecting the natural environment. It is just a winery built into the hillside, so as not to cut any trees down. And that rock wall that you see in this picture is meant to mimic the curvature of the hill above it. So it's very, it has a presence, but it's also understated, and it's really functional. It is form following function as a winery, and designed specifically for the Quintessa Estate. And then the other components of having a great estate is that you have people who live there. And so the family, Augustine and Valeria, this is their home. they have a home on the property. That's important. That you have.
This is the home right here, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
That you have a hospitality center, so you're able to also greet visitors. That's actually where I'm sitting right now, and it's the on top of the winery is our hospitality center. And then finally, and what is hard to see in this picture, at least where I am, our faces are on top of it, you have what we call a spiritual place. So with the Chateau of Bordeaux or Europe that you're familiar with, it tends to be a chapel or a shrine. Here we have what we call our spiritual place, which is a place to meditate, be quiet, and to feel the character and the soul of the property that's in the center of the Quintessa Estate, amongst the vineyard that is underneath some of the oldest trees on the property. And that's where I like to go to think about the year. And it's also where I go to feel the character of Quintessa as I walk through and see all of the differences that we're talking about. This map illustrates in the different colors what I was talking about with the differences of the Quintessa geology. How in this map, actually, and we're looking to situate you, we're looking towards the east, the Vaca Mountain Range is at the top of the map and the Napa River is at the bottom. The kind of light green color is the eastern hills of the property that have that white volcanic ash, have that origin in the Vaca Mountain Range. They are pretty old and relatively old. For the Napa Valley, these are pretty old soils. And they have that low clay, low fertility. The vines have had to struggle really hard to become mature and to become in balance in the eastern hills. And now that the original plantings were from 1990, and these vines are still standing and thriving, they have this ability to express the best of the character of those white soils, which is that length and that distinctive texture to the finish of Quintessa. The red part that is around the Dragon's Lake, that is what we'd call our central hills. And that was the part of the property I was talking about that has the mixed volcanics and cobbles, and it's pretty deep and has varying levels of different minerals. And so here you have a lot of diversity because of elevation and aspect, but also because of the variation in the amount of these rocks and cobbles and the amount of these minerals. So from the Dragon's Terrace block, which is just on the kind of like the eastern side of the Dragon's Lake, so just on the top in this picture, that's the other side of the hill that the winery is built into. And the top of the hill is the native oak woodland, and then Dragon's Terrace is alongside, and it's west facing. And this is this incredible nut brown soil with, I would call it a very flexible terroir, a very generous terroir. You have wine, this is that kind of suppleness in the core of Quintessa. Particularly, I can see it in the 2010 Quintessa, where you have this body, and then you have this finish of tannin. So it's a very long finish, but it's also supple. It reminds me of fruit. That is that really beautiful and kind of generous and flexible terroir of Dragon's Terrace. On the other side is where you have all that minerality in the wines, where you have the graphite and the tar and the tobacco notes. That is also in Tesoro and in Monte Cruz is where our Carmenere is planted. We have 5, so not only do we have all of these differences in the soils on the property that have a lot of differences in the, results in a lot of differences in the wine character, we also have 5 red varieties planted on the property that are part of the Quintessa blend. The Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and that Carmenere that Augustin and Valeria were able to bring cuttings. We have 2 blocks of Carmenere, and they were able to bring cuttings directly from Chile, from 2 of the oldest and most famous, considered some of the best Carmenere vineyards in Chile. One is in Puomo, and it's the source for Almaviva. And then the other is the Nayen vineyard, which is over 100 years old, Carmenere, That's the source of the Nayan wine. This different varieties, but really this diversity has caused, when the original planting, Valeria wanted to respect the contours of the land. And so what you see on this map, this is a map that was drawn to sort of highlight the vineyard blocks. There's 26 different vineyard blocks on Quintessa. But because of the diversity that we see even more underground, actually, so in 2018, for example, I made 85 different picking sections of this estate. It's pretty incredible. I was talking about the 70 lots that go in to make illumination. Well, with Quintessa, we're talking about 100 to 150. And it's important to be able to isolate the different characters so that we can accentuate that character, and then bring it back together in the process of blending to showcase the entire character of the estate. And someone just asked the question about how big the estate is. Quintessa itself is 280 acres. And right now we have 130 acres of vines. So there's also a lot of the property that's not planted to vines, and actually will not be. When we're fully planted, so we have a little bit of renovation right now, will be 160 acres. The remainder of that acreage is the native oak woodlands and the lake. So the lake is our natural reservoir. During our winter rains, the water is collected in the lake, and that we use as our irrigation source. And then the oak woodlands that existed when Augustine and Valeria discovered Quintessa remain. No trees were cut down in the development of the vineyard or in the development of the winery. And that was it was a controversial decision back then. It was, just as it was a controversial decision to be organic from the very beginning. Now we all care about these kind of things, and we understand that how you're farming a property, how you're taking care of the land matters. But in 1990, we didn't even have organic certifications. So it's really incredible to think about the kind of foresight that Valeria had. But I think even more so with the keeping the native oak woodlands. So in the winemaking process here, I utilize what we call native yeast, wild yeast. I'm not adding any yeast or tannins or bacteria or acid. I'm just allowing the natural grapes and to show the true terroir, the true character of the Quintessa estate. I actually have, my undergrad was chemistry and biology. I got a master's degree in viticulture and enology. We've done lots of studies, and that show that there's not a whole lot of Saccharomyces cerevisiae that's actually on the grape clusters. And so people would always be arguing about whether or not native yeast really come from the vineyard or not. Recently, there's been some really exciting work that's been done that show that the actual home of the native Saccharomyces yeast, or the wild yeast, is in the oak woodlands. So that they did this study of testing soil underneath all these different types of trees. And oak trees were the greatest source for Saccharomyces cerevisiae, of wild yeast. And probably oak woodlands were the origin, back 5,000 years ago, of these yeast altogether. And so it shows you how important these non-planted parts, these native parts of Quintessa are to our terroir. I find that really exciting. If there are any other science geeks out there, they might find it exciting too. So are there any questions now? Which wine have we started tasting? Have you guys started tasting the 2010 Quintessa? This is an exceptional vintage. 2010 Quintessa for me really marks a moment in time, and a moment when the Quintessa grapes, the original Quintessa plantings, had reached 20 years of age, had come to a first stage of maturity. And it shows in the wine. This is a cooler year. It has great brightness. It has great freshness. 2010 was always one of my very favorite vintages. But I have to say, on release, I always thought this is a great wine. and it's a great wine for me to cellar. It's not necessarily a wine I want to drink now. And that's because of all the incredible acidity that the 2010 had because of that coolness of the year. And now, 10 years later, oh my God, it's beautiful. It's so right. I think this wine is really bright. It still shows some of the primary fruit characters, but it has developed and continued to evolve, where you had once these kind of like black fruit, black cherry, even maybe a little bit of like pie spice character. That's now developed into this beautiful violets, lilac, dried herbal notes. You still have this fresh fruit, but it's more red. It's like a little bit of red cherry, red currant, but this incredible mouthfeel where you have that fruit character in the mouth, but you have these incredibly supple tannins. So I'm a big fan of the 2010 vintage. Does anyone have any comments on the wine, or were there questions that I missed in the chat? Let me see. Okay, so there's a question, what's the current water level of Dragon's Lake? Oh, well, to be honest, it's lower than I've ever seen it. It's kind of funny because it usually, or not funny, but the lake looks really full in the winter. Some winters we actually even have to pump out of the lake into the Napa River. Of course, that didn't happen. We've had 2 years in a row of about half the average rainfall amount. So the whole west of the United States is experiencing a drought that we've never, an unprecedented level of drought, something we don't have on record for at least 100 years. We have a good amount of water here at Quintessa. We have enough water. We're going to be fine. But to be honest, the lake doesn't look as beautiful as it has in other years. But I believe we still have about 30 plus acre feet. Yeah. And are there any other questions about the 2010 vintage? No. The 2016 vintage. So wow, 2016 is a big favorite of mine. What do I mean by re-release? Oh, I forgot to mention. So we were talking about the founding belief that Quintessa has the potential to be a great wine estate of the world. Well, it's all well and good to have your wines be beautiful when they're young, and to have yourself be well known domestically. But to really be a great wine estate of the world, you have to do 2 things. One, you have to be on the world stage. And so Quintessa is on La Place de Bordeaux. So we're in the Negociant system, not in the United States, of course, but around the world. And we are one of the few Napa wines that the Bordelais, the Bordeaux Negociants, are happy to be sharing with the world in the same way that they're sharing the Bordeaux Chateau. The other thing that you have to be a great wine estate, and the belief that we're making a great wine, is that you're ageable. And so I know you guys are really great collectors, but we needed to prove it to ourselves. And so beginning in 2010, because like I said, it sort of marked this moment of maturity of the vineyard, and I think maturity of us as a team, we held aside some cases of 2010 at release and kept them inside the winery. So stored them in perfect condition, and with the idea that we would taste them again in 10 years and decide whether or not it was worthy of a re-release. And so it's a very small re-release, what we call our decade release. And it's only going to be done in exceptional vintages that are worthy of the name. And 2010 was the very first vintage of the Quintessa decade release. And this is a release that is done mostly, and what we held back was mostly in magnums, because I believe that magnums are the very best format for aging wine. And they are. I don't think you guys are going to disagree with me about that. You have the same amount of headspace that you do in a 750, but you have twice the amount of wine. So you have all of the phenolic, like all the tannin aging components and the flavor aging components, but you maintain more freshness because you have a different interaction and a different integration of oxygen through the cork. So that is what we meant by re-release. And that's why those notes have the release wine notes and then also the retasted wine notes on the 2010. Now the 2016, we'll see if that becomes a decade release in 10 years. I think it does because this is one of my very favorite vintages as well. 2016 is actually a lot like the 2018, which is our new release, which was just released yesterday. 2016 is a generous year, what I would call a year where Mother Nature is very nice to us. We didn't have frost, we didn't have heat waves, we had kind of a very even and uneventful growing season. When I was asked to write these notes and to write about the season, God, it was actually really hard because it was hard for me to come up with anything. I was like, well, wait, there was no, that didn't happen. It just sort of came through. And what I saw in the vineyard was beautiful energy in the canopy. And that energy in the canopy translated to energy in the grapes. As they came into the winery, they were in near perfect condition and the fermentations went beautifully. And the wine has always had depth of flavor, character, and this incredible harmony to it. And now, as it's had a few years from release, it's starting to really reveal even more layers of flavor. It has the savory notes coming through. So I really think that it is a beautiful place right now and kind of in that still young, we're still in primary, it's only 2016, but it's giving us that preview of what this wine is going to be like in 10 and 20 years. I love it. I love the fresh tobacco notes, the spice character, the way the red and the black fruit show, and then that typical graphite and kind of like a cocoa dust, that Rutherford dust. When we talk about Rutherford dust, we're actually sometimes being literal. It can be pretty dusty and it gets in your mouth and you have this sort of texture to it. And that's that texture of the dustiness of the tannins of the wine. So that's our 2016 vintage. Do you guys am I missing any other questions about the wine? No.
Okay, I think we've got the questions up to date, but just from my side, if you could speak to, I think we all know, or at least there are, those of us that are kind of collectors and privy to the quality of the vintage. Obviously 16 was a great vintage. Kind of looking back on it, I've heard some winemakers say that, when asked to describe the vintage, we all, realize in retrospect that it was a fantastic vintage, but when asked to describe it, it's almost one of those things where, it's hard, maybe hard to describe because things were so smooth relative to, that it's kind of hard to pinpoint, so I guess my question to you might be, at what point does a winemaker like yourself realize you're on the cusp of something special? Is it something that, as the season itself goes along, or at what point do you realize that it's going to be exactly what 16 is, has the potential? It's already a great wine, but what it has the potential to be.
For 16, I actually felt it was an incredible vintage from the very beginning. That is a feeling that I had from the first moment of harvest in 2016. I just loved the flavors and I loved how it was developing. And it always had this, I don't know how to explain it, just this energy, this personality to the wine, and the blend it came together really easily. There are some vintages that actually, as the winemaker, I need a little bit more distance from to get to appreciate the vintage itself and to appreciate the wine, to see it for what it is itself, as opposed to what my intentions, what my thought is, and maybe, my experience. And that's why, even though I know all these wines, I actually, when I'm working on the blends, I still do blind tasting. I still taste the wines blind because I have my favorites. I have my favorite lots. I have my, I have the lots that are actually my least favorite. Like there's one block that's really steep and I fell really hard once in it. like one of those kind of falls where you're just like, you're walking and the next thing you know, you're like looking up at the sky and like, even like you see your feet up in the air and you're like, oh, so, you know, I don't always have a great like impression of that block because it wasn't a good feeling. So it's really important for me even to taste blind. So I'm not too close to it, but I really, you know, 2016 was one of those years, like the vineyard was beautiful. The team was incredible. Like we get our harvest interns and you have this harvest energy and everything was just so much fun. And we had a great team and I think that all translates. I think that is that's some of the terroir, the people and the energy that translates into the wine. There's other years where I'm not quite as sure. And 2018 is one of those. So 2018, I think, you know, to be very frank, I think this is the best wine to date that we have ever produced from the Quintessa Estate. I think this is the most clear expression of the character of our terroir. And I felt that it was really good during harvest, but I wasn't as sure of it until about 6 months after harvest and tasting through. So there's like, you have to let it go through malolactic fermentation. The very worst time to taste a wine, by the way, a new vintage is in February from barrel. So don't ask, I won't do it. There's nothing worse than the way the new vintage tastes right after or while it's going through malolactic fermentation. But about 6 months after that, then you can really sort of feel it. And that's at that point that I knew I was like, oh, wait a second. Oh my gosh, this wine is incredible. This vintage is incredible. And I think there's a lot of similarities between 2018 and 2016. They're both what I'd call generous years, where the season was mild, you know, no heat waves, no frost, good canopies, good amount of fruit. So you didn't have too small of a vintage, you didn't have too big of a vintage. Actually in 2018, we did have to do a fair amount of crop adjustment because it could have been an overwhelming, like the vines were a little too happy and maybe put out too much fruit. And we needed to adjust that back to balance. But what was so special about 2018 was the harvest season itself. You were able to make every single decision with precision because it was a unhurried season. 2016 maybe had a few more hurries to it, but both of them have that same character as the wine jumps out the glass at you. So I think of generous years as wines that come out the glass at me, that they have a freshness to the fruit. So it's perfectly ripe, not overripe, not underripe. It's fresh fruit. You have underneath that fruit, even though this wine is so young, released yesterday, I already see the spice components, the herbal character. So you get that bay laurel, that tobacco leaf, a little bit like, if anyone has ever done calligraphy, there's the stone ink. So it's like the solid ink. There's kind of, or if anyone remembers what ink, nobody remembers what ink smells like anymore, but that kind of ink character. No, seriously, it's almost like a incense. And there's this, it's kind of beautiful. And I noticed that in the 2018 as well. It's this combination of the herbal component, the floral component, the savory note. And then of course, the tannins for 18. The wine in the mouth is so bright, clear. It has body, it has density, it has body, it has tannin. This wine is ageable, but it also is really light on its feet. And that I think is what makes it so incredible and really so exciting for us when we think about the future of Quintessa.
Rebekah, something I've noticed, and I've been meaning to ask you this, and just curious the philosophy behind this, but since taking over as head winemaker, you've had a string of amazing vintages to work with, and everything it just seemingly keeps getting better and better and better as you go along. But one thing that I've noticed, the varietal breakdown, the cepage of the wine has stayed pretty similar over the years. However, you seem to be year after year sort of backing off the use of new French oak. I think from the start of about 85%, and now with this vintage down to about 62. And every year you seem to dial it back a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about the philosophy
Yeah,
behind that and what
that,
your thoughts are on that?
yeah, and that's correct. I think of oak as a supporting player. It's important. I mean, when you have a lot of tannin in your wine, it works really well to have a lot of or good new oak. So, I mean, I would say 60%, 60 is not too low for a new French oak. But as the vines have become more mature and as our farming has become even more fine-tuned, we are allowing these vines to come and to match their sugar ripeness, their kind of fruit ripeness with their phenolic ripeness. And so the fruit that is coming in from the Quintessa vineyard nowadays is absolutely exceptional. It has strength of character and also these riper tannins, but not overripe. So ripe tannins, they're not green or astringent. And it has its own enough structure of its own that I don't want to add makeup. I don't want to cover this up. I don't want to obscure it. And so I've been bringing down the new French oak component and bringing and really focusing on barrels that are supportive of the wine. So barrels that have still tight grain and very tight grain oak, so center of France, wines that are barrels that act a little bit like salt in your cooking. When you have the right amount, it accentuates the flavors, but I don't want us to be tasting oak flavor. So it's a supporting component. So that is actually very, very, special or whatever, observant of you to notice, but it is something that has been thoughtfully done to be bringing that down, because the wine itself doesn't need all of that oak tannin. And certainly I don't want makeup. I don't want you to see or to think like this tastes like Rebekah made this wine. I think that when everything is going right and the team is working together and the vines are in sync, you get a wine like 2018 where it just speaks of itself. It doesn't feel made. It speaks clearly of this incredible place and this estate. And that even if you aren't able to visit Quintessa, if you've never seen this, if we haven't had this conversation and you sort of heard my story about the geology and the terroir, that when you're tasting this wine, it should still transport you to a very specific place. And that's the goal. Okay, Joyce asked, I referenced a comparison to Bordeaux early tasting the wines. That's correct. It seems okay. Right. Okay. So the question was about the cepage, the blend, and that the Merlot component is much less in 2018, certainly than in 2019 or even 2016. Historically with Quintessa, we haven't put the blend percentages out. Not to keep it a secret, but because Quintessa is a red wine, Quintessa is the Quintessa Estate. But recently I've started putting those on the tech sheet because it kind of came to us that by not doing it, it felt like maybe we were trying to hide something. We're not. Those percentages are really based off of how the vineyard is planted and also the age of the blocks. So this 2018 is 92% Cabernet Sauvignon. It's weighted that heavy into Cabernet Sauvignon because our patrimonial blocks, so our original planting blocks that are still thriving today, happen to all be Cabernet Sauvignon. And the older vines are more consistent and show their terroir more clearly. And so we're putting a lot of work into allowing all of the vines to reach full maturity and to become much more than 30 years old, to be 50 years old and become incredibly consistent and have that depth of character. The Merlot percentage has gone down a little bit because a little bit of that replanting and renewal has had to happen. So as our climate has gotten warmer and also particularly drier, some of the original Merlot plantings were struggling more and more, and we had to make the decision to do a renovation on them. So the reason that the Merlot percentage has gone down is because the percentage of Merlot planted at the Quintessa Estate has gone down. And then of course, Carmenere has gone up, and you'll be seeing Cabernet Franc going up as well in the future as the Cabernet Franc blocks become into full maturity. So that kind of change just sometimes gives you a little bit of window into the character of the vintage itself. So a cooler year can be more challenging for Carmenere. A hotter year is more challenging for Merlot, or even young vine. So sometimes you can read that into it as well. But hopefully you're just really what we're just trying to show is the character of the estate itself.
Rebekah, can you speak maybe quickly to the philosophy, just like kind of totally divergent philosophy, some of which are like, with how vineyards are planted and just the approach from the start, and then just the winemaking philosophy itself. The Quintessa mindset, which is obviously the art of the blend and very much modeled after Bordeaux, in the sense of maintaining, to your point, about the cepage. It's funny, but sometimes we talk even internally about how, is there a European versus, American or New World mindset where, sometimes as Americans, like we're very hyper focused on, we want to know like the specific percentages of everything. We want to know specific, like where did our, tell me the supply, the chain of our food and everything. Like literally, we're so inquisitive. We want to know everything, and that's great. But, whereas, Bordeaux, maybe more of this is the Grand Vin, and it's going to obviously have some variance in it, but like this is what it is, as opposed to, the individual percentages. But back to my question, the idea of Quintessa being, again, all about that blend, whereas, and I'm sure you probably have some conversations with, winemakers next door, frankly, that are very hyper focused on single blocks or 100% Cabernet. And do you feel like, are there philosophical differences or approaches to the winemaking? Just kind of speak to how, I'm sure that obviously if you were given a single block of 100% Cabernet, I'm sure you could make a great wine, but, just kind of your idea of, take that wherever you like, yeah. Because it's such a unique thing that a lot of people don't realize that, obviously we take for granted that when we see, a Cabernet Sauvignon on the label, sometimes it is 100% Cabernet from a single block. Sometimes it's obviously by Napa standards or by, the way it's labeled, it could be, a little bit less. And then obviously a red wine or a proprietary blend is entirely different. So just kind of take that wherever you'd like.
Yeah. No, I think it is come down to a philosophy, because you hit it actually right. In the United States, actually, at least in California, I don't know all of the labeling laws, you actually could put Cabernet Sauvignon if it's 75%. So some of those wines are maybe are blended in, but where we put red wine on the label and then we call it just Quintessa for that reason is that because we think that the differences or the expression of the terroir is more important than what the blend is. Blends are important, but I'll challenge you, and hopefully you can come visit us soon and we can taste some barrel samples. The differences between the Cabernet Sauvignon, for instance, that's grown on the different soil types, I think is more different than the differences in some of the varieties. And so that is the expression that matters. And there are a lot of, the wine world is fun because, right, we have a product that is beautiful to drink and has lots of flavor and, it kind of leads itself to living a great life, but it also leads itself to having like long philosophical discussions and thinking about things really hard. And that's true in winemaking, of course. And you have, in terms of planting and vineyard management, you have very different schools of thought. We're talking a lot now about tillage, for instance, if you guys have heard about regenerative farming and no-till farming and kind of really understanding our placement in our statement. Some people swear by, or some winemakers swear by tight spacing and small vines. I do not believe in that. I don't think that is necessarily appropriate for our region. And the reason is because I don't think that small vines here in our situation allow for vines to become mature and for you to have old vines. I'll give you a fact, I went to UC Davis and I was taught that vines and vineyards need to be replanted at 25 years old, because you're going to have some virus, some eutypa, which is like a fungal disease that comes in through pruning wounds, and you're going to be lowering the yield. So you need to replant. The average age of vines in the New World, I think, is 17 years old. Well, I mean, it's 20 years old, at 17 years old, you're just beginning to come into balance with your environment. And so the reason that I'm not a proponent of really tight spacing in small vines is because vines are vines, and vines want to continue to grow every year. They need to act to be healthy. They need to act like they naturally want to be. And of course, through our trellising and through our pruning, we're going to bring them back into a geometry that's a little bit more that we can manage. But you also have to respect their natural tendency to kind of put on wood and to want to grow year over year. And if you have a very small spacing, you have no space for vines to get old. And then you get old, you have to make big cuts. Big cuts in the pruning bring in damage to the vascular tissue. And then you have vines that are in decline. And then you've proven your own dogma that, oh no, old vines are in decline and I need to replant them. And so it becomes this cycle. And so I reject all that and reject that kind of dogma. And I think that we can easily have vines that are 50 years old here. And that is our challenge at Quintessa, is to create that kind of health in the soil. So the health in the soil microbiome, natural fertility, and health in the entire environment to allow that to happen. And the organic and the biodynamic farming practices lead to that. And I think that that is what's going to allow us as well to adapt to climate change, and to adapt to our changing climate, is to have old vines that we are caring for with organic and biodynamic practices. I'm not sure that was actually your question, but that was my answer.
I'm going to try to tie in a couple different questions in the chat all into one, if I could. And, because obviously people some of us are asking specific questions about vintages and comparisons between the vintages, and just in general, and maybe you can just speak to the wines that you've made so far at Quintessa. Just your idea of where, and it's so hard to project. Obviously, we're asking to project a wine, a current release, that, what is it going to be in a couple of years compared to 5 years, compared to 10 years. But, maybe you can just speak to the wines that you've made and where you feel that, what you think might be great for drinking in the, now or nearer term, as opposed to, I think we can all agree that, something like a 13 or a 16 is going to be a long-term vintage. But, obviously, I'm sure you've had a chance to try these, throughout, and just, whatever you think, take that where you will. Yeah,
I think that is the tasting that we've just done is a really good way to understand how Quintessa ages. But of course, we haven't had a 20-year. So as the wines, what's special about Quintessa? Let me back up. Is the ability to be ageable and to be pleasurable to drink young. So you have all of those things. I actually am happy to drink the 2018 right now, but seeing the 2010, so seeing how the wine, and the 2016, how the wine has built up, it actually reveals itself more, I would say. So as the wine is aging, it starts to shed some of that baby fat. The 2018 is full of baby fat. You see the character, and you see this, let's say the bone structure underneath, but there's a lot of baby fat in there. As the wine ages, and then you get to 2016, and now you're starting to see this beautiful features of the wine. At about 10 years of age is, for me personally, with the way I like to drink wine, one of my kind of favorite points in the ageability and the aging point of the wines, because you still have some primary fruit, which I enjoy, but you've developed those bottle age characteristics. You've got some of the mushroom, the savory notes. It's not just fruit anymore. But that is that for me is one of the high points in the aging period, is about 10 years from release. And then after that, the wine, the Quintessa wine just brings out more and more of those savory notes. So that tobacco leaf character, the graphite, this forest floor note that I love, that you're walking. One of the things that I noticed with the 2010 is like, and it's going to show more as it ages more, is that it was the smell that I notice when I'm walking through the redwood forests in the winter, and you're walking through the kind of the leaf litter and the fresh but wet, earthy character. That's that beautiful note of how it ages. So that would kind of be my like general aging trajectory for Quintessa. And of course, each vintage is a little different. You said 2013. 2013 was a very, like it was declared, what vintage of the century, is an incredible vintage, but it was also a really big tannin vintage. We had an average of about 3 seeds per berry in 2013. And then we were blessed by an Indian summer, so a warm September and October that allowed all of that tannin, all of that seed to ripen and be beautifully extractable in the wines. But what it made is for these massive wines, harmonious, but massive. And so for me, 2013, well, that's a long aging wine. And I'll compare that then with the 2000 and what would be a like not shorter aging vintage, but a year like 2009. Okay, I had that recently. So 2009 was a pretty normal season. And then we had what for us is an unusual feature of the vintage, is we had a rain in October. And I've always noticed that a rain, while it's not damaging to Cabernet Sauvignon, it actually causes more soft tannins. So it kind of softened up the tannins of 2009. And it's allowed that wine to age beautifully, but also be at a point right now where I think it's actually at its peak. Whereas 2010, I'm happy to drink 2010 now, but I'm also happy to drink it another 20 years. I think 2009 is a vintage that I actually even, after having tasted it, I was like, oh, I gotta drink that now. I love it. Not old, but it's beautiful right now. So I think there's this general vintage trajectory, and then there's each individual vintage. And then there's, of course, your personal taste. Like I said, I do like primary fruit.
I think if I could, I'll throw a couple more questions at you, excuse me, and then we'll wrap it up. But just as a follow-up, Joyce wanted to know, and I think it's a really good point, is that the 16 is approachable now, and I think the question lies at the fact that there's not a bunch of Merlot in it, which is true. I mean, obviously the Merlot can add some plushness, but from a vintage perspective, is that as simple as saying that maybe something on the wines from the floor are drinking a little bit more approachable, as opposed to the monsters and more muscular wines that might need a lot more time from the hillsides and the mountains, or am I it's kind of what do you think there? I mean, and I agree, because the 16 is, I mean, despite the fact that it's going to be a very long-term wine, it is really enjoyable right now.
I think that is a great thing about the wine. As someone who has a lot of wine in her cellar, but refuses to inventory and organize it, I really enjoy wines that have a very long drinkability window. I think that there is a difference in general between mountain wines, valley floor wines, and benchland wines here in Napa Valley. But Napa is really diverse. So the soils can change so much and so fast that it can be harder to make those kind of overarching generalizations. And I think that's why actually for a long time, typicity in Napa Valley was really more of a style than it was a terroir or character. And so some of that is going to be the choices that the winemakers are making about their extractions. Are they doing hot and fast winemaking. So extracting a lot of upfront tannin, maybe not long finishes. You know, a lot of people are making wines that are drinking young because that's what they think the consumers are consuming the wine young. And so they're not concerning themselves with ageability. Quintessa, we are working on, and our goal is to make a wine that is elegant and balanced and harmonious. And so that is going to be a wine that is ageable. It's not about being flashy young. So again, you know, not using 200% new oak and, you know, all the sexy winemaking tricks, that and looking for really, really overripe kind of black fruit jamminess in the fruit. Instead, I want to have structure and classic character, elegance, which I think is a beautiful thing, and having that kind of harmony. And so the blend itself and the blending process and kind of those differences, the different varieties, they lend themselves into making a wine of harmony. So it's not simply, and I think the question about Merlot you were asking was about using Merlot as a way to soften hard tannins in Cabernet Sauvignon. We have adequate, actually more than adequate sunshine in Napa Valley. And so the tannins are right. It's almost every year that the seed tannin is completely ripe in the wines and ripe and extractable in the Cabernet Sauvignons. So the Merlot is not necessarily about softening what it is, a tannic character. It's about adding a plushness and a fullness to the middle in terms of the blending, how I think of it, the blend. So like I know I said that the terroir and the place that it was planted matters more than the variety, but the variety matters too, of course. You know, Cabernet Sauvignon is the base, is the structure. Cabernet Franc is the, it's like more skeletal, a little bit more rustic, red fruit, herbal character. Merlot is the plushness is the middle. Merlot has medium body tannins, but not much of a finish. Petit Verdot is the spice blender, you know, potpourri, dried floral, inkiness. Carmenere is the herbal component. And again, that kind of medium body, it's got a tannin a little similar to Merlot. And then that, you know, that all together is what makes the blend. So it's kind of everything, I guess.
So I think with that, we will probably put a bow on everything. As you probably quickly found out, we're a very inquisitive group, and our hour-long session turned into a little extra, but this is a lot of fun, and we genuinely value your time. So thank you for sharing it with us. And Mike, is there anything
for inviting me?
Absolutely, thank you, really, for you know, helping us, you know, get this together, and the fact that to be able to share, again, not just 3 vintages, but 3 really good vintages. You know, some could say there's not many bad vintages in Napa, but in all seriousness, you know, 10, 16, and 18, this is a lot of fun, and this is a really, really special thing that we can put together. So Mike, I'll kind of pass it back to you if there's anything that you need to add or want to say to the group before we sign off here.
Well, you know, as I think you said earlier, maybe Rebekah said it, you know, yesterday was the official release of the 2018 vintage. Rebekah's probably too humble to say it, but I'm not. This was the highest scoring Quintessa the highest score that we've ever received on Quintessa, and we scored really well in the past, obviously. But this being the 99 pointer, you know, I hope that you enjoy it. I hope you see you know, with this tasting, where the future lies with this wine, and that you get as much as you can, because I really think that you can drink this wine now, but you will certainly be rewarded, as you can see, for laying that down for a little bit of time. But we appreciate your time. Thank you, Rebekah, for joining us. It's always such a pleasure to hear you talk. You're so passionate about not only the winemaking, but I think more importantly, the estate, and really what how important that idea and the ideology of an estate is.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you guys so much for allowing me to come on and to share these vintages. And you know, Rick and Lindsay have come and we had that incredible tasting in the blending room. That was pretty special. We'll have to do that again when we're allowed to get together again. And I'd love to show you what we're doing now. But it is an absolutely beautiful estate, and there is something very special about Quintessa. And I hope that you guys, after this tasting, when you taste Quintessa wines and the wines that are coming from your cellar, and hopefully you're going to put some 2018 in your cellar, because I'm serious, this is an incredible wine. I'm so, like, having been the person who tastes so much Quintessa, and especially young Quintessa, I'm really excited about this too. That you think about the stories behind it, and how that adds a little more context, a little more layers, and what the wines represent. Because we hope you enjoy them, and we hope that they bring you joy. So thank you.
Certainly did enjoy. And with that, for those that are wondering, we certainly will be following up in the coming days. I know it's a holiday weekend, but we'll definitely touch base on obviously the exciting 18 release, but this is some availability on some other stuff too. And so with that, we'll sign off on behalf of Silas and I and the entire Chicago Wine Company. Really, thank you, Rebekah, so much, Mike as well. And we hope to see you out in Napa as things start transitioning a little bit back more towards normal, but we'll definitely see you soon. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
guys. Bye.